John, it's great seeing you. It's great seeing you again. I'm looking forward to talking with you. And what I really want to talk about is that you just got back from an exciting trip to Denali, and I want to get into that. But maybe the first question is, how did you get into this whole mountain climbing thing? What did that journey look like from someone who had never climbed the mountain to someone who just climbed the highest mountain in North America?
It's good question, George. It's great to see you as well, and I appreciate you having me on. In growing up, God, how did I get into mountain climbing? I grew up in Minnesota, where there aren't any mountains. It's really flat. I always enjoyed being outside, camping. So I really got started more through like an outdoors path in the Boy Scouts. That was my avenue to getting outside, to going camping, and we were mostly doing things like canoeing. But I always remember reading like Outside magazine, or like sort of had this idea in my mind that like, dude, climbing mountains seems really cool. So part of going to college, I went to Colorado College, was I wanted to be in the West. I wanted to have access to mountains, and kind of rolled up freshman year, like, I want to find some people that are going climbing and join them. And I did that. I was super naive. I had like no equipment and no idea what I was doing, and was fortunate enough to find some folks that knew a little bit of what they were doing. And we started climbing, and I took to it immediately. And it was sort of this way to experience the outdoors of something that I always really liked doing in a totally new way. And it sort of just became my thing. I really took to it, spent a lot of time doing it. And in college, I ended up enjoying it enough that I started working as a mountain guide, full-time during the summers, and then part-time junior and senior year in college, with the goal of making that my full-time gig. And I did. So after graduating college, undergrad, I spent 4 years full-time as a mountaineering guide, climbing and guiding.
And where were you a guide at when you graduated from college?
Well, I started guiding on Pikes Peak. Colorado College is in Colorado Springs, and Pikes Peak is like the backdrop of the city. It's this phenomenal 14,000 foot peak with a variety of technical rock and ice and snow routes on it. So I started out there in school, and then when I graduated, I was like, hey, I want to go to bigger terrain, which in the United States is in the Cascades. So I moved to Seattle. I worked for Alpine Ascents International. It's a 7 summits guiding company. I was primarily on Mount Rainier in the Cascades and on Denali in Alaska. Worked a little bit internationally as well, on big glaciated peaks in Washington, across the West, and in Alaska.
Wow. And when you were a guide with Alpine Ascents, what was that experience like? Was it to take a group of people that know nothing about climbing? Because I imagine a lot of people that come there, it's maybe their first mountain, or they may have only done a couple of them, and they're relying on you to kind of get them safely to wherever they can go. What was that experience like? Was it stressful? Was it exhilarating? How did you like that time?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was really educational to me as a climber, but really as a person, as to who I am today. Because we would take these groups, for example, on Rainier, like our bread and butter trip was the summit climb on Rainier, 3-day trips. So they're relatively short in duration, high volume. So we're doing like 15 or maybe 20 in a summer. So every 3 or 4, you have a day off in between. So every 3 or 4 days, you get a new group of 8 clients that generally don't know each other and have like the bare minimum of skills, and we have to pull them together to act as a team. Because even though, they are our clients, everyone is, including the guides, are part of the team together, literally tied on the same rope teams of 3 or 4, relying on each other to keep everybody safe. So it was a good way to see a lot of different types of people and get to interact with a lot of different people, and I really liked that. What I thought was really challenging about guiding is the risk management. Is like, I thought when I started guiding, it was quickly, I mean, when I started climbing too, it was like quickly apparent, like, this is kind of dangerous, which is kind of like what makes it cool. It's like, whoa, like, this is real. And I was like, okay, I better up my game here and learn the skills so that I can manage the risk, so that what I'm doing is safe, in my opinion, right? Like, there's a broad interpretation of that, but like, of what I'm comfortable doing. And what I learned about guiding was, what I went into guiding thinking like I could apply that same type of structure to guiding, like, hey, I can really up my skills and become the best at managing all these situations and control the risk in a way that felt comfortable. And I came to the conclusion after a few years of guiding in like sort of big terrain that that wasn't really possible in my eyes. It's just sort of, and that's like a matter of opinion, right? There are many people, I have a number of friends that make careers out of guiding and do it in a way they think is safe. I never got there. I thought that there's just a level of risk that you need to shoulder in order to keep doing the job. And so I thought that was really tough for me, and led to why I wanted to pivot out and ultimately went to business school, to be honest.
Yeah. And that's where we first met, was in business school, when you had gotten done being a guide at Rainier, and then we met in Chicago, and that's when we started running together. And I want to talk more about that. But when you stopped guiding, but you didn't stop climbing mountains though, how did you kind of continue that process post guiding?
Well, I sort of did stop for a while. Looking back now, I had a hard time separating my identity as a climber from that as my identity as a guide. And when I went to Chicago, I largely stopped climbing. I mean, I made a few trips back to Colorado, or where I am now, or to the west to see friends, and we do a little bit of climbing. It was like fairly casual. I mean, my skill set started to erode being in Chicago as well, just without doing it regularly. It was hard to stay sharp. And then I stopped when we were in Kellogg, and I realized after graduating that I missed it. And at that point had enough separation from guiding that I was able to create this identity as a climber sort of for myself. And it took on a very different shape, and the type of objectives that I was climbing was different. And it was much more on equal terms with partners on equal sort of footing, equal skill set. And it was, honestly, it was much more, it was different. It took on a great feeling. It took on like more of a partnership feeling, rather than like, hey, this is my job.
When did you decide that, you know what, I would love to one day make an attempt at climbing Mount Denali? When did that enter kind of your brain as an idea?
Well, the first time that crossed my mind was probably in like 2007, when I finished up undergraduate, and I went about becoming a guide in a methodical way of coming up with these sort of, maybe, I don't know, benchmarks is the word, but these sort of like markers that have like told me that I've sort of arrived. I've made it as a guide. I'm sort of credible as a guide. And one of them was leading a trip on Denali. And so the first time that I did that was in 2008 as a guide. and I did 2 trips as the assistant. And then in 2010, so you do 1 a year typically, sometimes 2, that's a lot. In 2010, I led a Denali trip. So it was like, that was a big accomplishment for me in my career guiding. And in 2010, that was the last time that I went to Denali. Was about when I stopped guiding and then went to Kellogg. Now fast forward to this last fall, say fall of 2022, it had been in the back of my mind that there's the regular route on Denali is called the West Buttress. It's a very traditional mountaineering route, walking uphill on moderate slopes, some steep slopes, but it's all walking. There's not really any technical climbing. Denali is like this big massif that has a lot of more challenging, more committing routes, and one of them that's really been on my mind is called the Cassine Ridge. It's on the south face of Denali. It's 8,000 feet of technical climbing, and it's very aesthetic. It just like splits the south face in half, and you can see the whole thing from base camp. And I was like, I want to do that. That has sort of been simmering for a number of years in creating my career after Kellogg and building a family. And now it's sort of back more in the forefront, on the front burner rather than the back. And I was like, I still want to go do this route. And so this last spring in June of this year, 2023, we made an attempt. The weather this season was particularly rocky. It wasn't like uniformly bad. So we had a what I would call a successful trip. We made it to the summit via the West Buttress, but we never had like the long enough weather window to make an attempt on the Cassine. We wanted 3 days of good high pressure, and we didn't get it. It was an unsettled year. The summit rate was lower by, I don't know. The stats are all on the NPS website. It was a challenging year. So we feel fortunate that we made it to the top. That was good.
Yeah. So that would be your third time. Is that right? Your third time on top of Denali?
That was this year's my third time. It was my 5th trip total. And it felt just as special as the first couple times.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people haven't even seen the mountain. Even less people have even attempted to get to the base camp of it. And even fewer have gone up it once. And you're in the minority, have gone up it multiple times.
It was cool. It was like, so like a lot of planning went into this trip. I haven't done it, like this is like it's a proper expedition. It's one of the things I think the planning and preparation is part of what makes it really cool. In general, it's a 3-week trip. The mountain, so Denali's just over 20,000 feet tall. You fly into 7,000 feet onto the Kahiltna Glacier. It's really cool. You take these old propeller planes. They've been refurbished with skis on them, so they land like right on the glacier. They like dump out all your stuff, and they're like, "See ya," and they take off. And you're like, whoa! And it's like, I mean, like when you fly to Denali, there are other people in the base camp, so you're not totally alone. Although this is like an aside, there are other climbing objectives nearby where you'll land and there's nobody around, and the plane flies off and you are like in the wilderness. It's not like the forest wilderness, but it's like whoa. It's like, dude, this is crazy.
And I mean, that's an experience that like you don't just get walking out your door in the city, right? Like there's always cars or things like that. Like, I mean, you're in the middle of nowhere.
Totally. Like there's no like approach, meaning like generally the rest of the climbing, like in the United States and in Canada, like we have good road access. You park your car and then you like walk for pick your time, 5 minutes and like a few days to the approach, and you sort of like, it mentally prepares you for like what you're going to climb.
Right.
But like on Denali, everybody flies in on the propeller plane, and it's this very stark like start of the expedition where they drop you, they throw all your stuff out of the airplane, and they're like, see ya. And then it's like they fly away, the plane buzzes off, and it's quiet, and it's like, whoa.
That's why. Because like at Rainier or Pikes Peak, like you drive up to a visitor center where there's a bathroom and a vending machine.
Totally. And like in the Alaska range, you're on these massive glaciers that are inherently dangerous, right? Because they're glaciers, they're like snow-covered ice fields, and the snow is covering over the crevasses, right? So like glaciers are moving bodies of ice, and they have cracks in them that are filled, they're not filled in, but they get bridged over by snow that falls in the wintertime. And then in the springtime and the summer, when everyone goes mountaineering, is like when the bridges start to melt. So you're like sort of always wondering, like, am I going to fall into a crevasse? And therefore you have to be roped up. You don't have to be, but you're generally roped up because it's safer, right? If you do fall in, you're going to be caught by your partner on the other end of the rope. And like the whole thing is just sort of like this really like sensory, intense experience where you're like hyper aware of like every step that you're taking, and there's just nothing else like it, and it's really, really cool.
The last time you had been big climbing was probably before business school, so in the like 2000, like late 2000s. Did you feel like, did your skills come right back to you when you showed up on the glacier?
Well, so that's a good question, because that was one thing that like in the preparation for the expedition, there was like we were preparing for the trip for like 6 months, and it's like in say like November and December when we put together like our training plan and the rough outline for the expedition, it's like, oh, it's like, this is going to be so great, it's going to be so fun to be back there. And then it's like as we get closer, it's sort of like, whoa, am I going to remember like how to do this? Because it's hard to train that. There aren't glaciers like that outside of the Alaska range. So outside of like going to the Alaska range, you can't really prepare for going to the Alaska range, if that makes sense. And it turns out when we landed and like when we started moving up the mountain, it came back really quickly, and it felt really good. There was like this very warm feeling of competence that came back. It was pretty special.
Who did you make the trip with?
I went with one climbing partner, my buddy Kitchen, who lives in town, in Boulder, that we've been climbing together for, I don't know, 11 or 12 years now. So we have a strong partnership, which was really part of why I didn't make it back for 13 years was life circumstances, making a career and a family, but also having the right person is so key to a successful expedition. And then having that person's schedule line up, it took all this time.
Sure. Well, as part of the process to get ready to climb the mountain, there was logistics that you had to plan. There was, calendars you had to line up, but you also had probably into, I imagine, mountain climbing shape. What did that process look like physically to make you, because what you did is a huge physical feat. What type of things did you have to do to get yourself cardiovascular ready, strength ready to be able to walk 20,000 feet up a mountain?
It was a huge amount of what started out running. It was a blend of, like cardio type of aerobic work and strength training, a massive amount of running, the sort of like low intensity, long duration aerobic work, mostly on the trails. I was trying to be off trail on uneven footing, I think is really key for the kind of like a mountaineering experience, rather than being on, say, like a paved city trail for like road running. And as we would get closer, I was layering in pack carries. Like, so a big factor on Denali is you have to carry all this warm clothing and equipment. You have to carry like 3 weeks worth of food, which is like kind of heavy.
Wow.
So you generally, like, nowhere around the world really do you have heavier packs, because when you go to bigger mountains, like say in Asia, on the Karakoram or the Himalaya, you have porters or animals carrying the weight for you. Denali is fairly unique that you as the climber have to carry all the weight. So that was a big sort of training stimulus, like a big like muscle that I wanted to flex. So would do pack carries couple 2-3 times a week as we got closer.
How heavy was the pack that you had to carry at the start of the trip?
It was about 100 pounds. It's pretty heavy. It's definitely like a shock to the system. Like, kind of no matter how much you've been training, it's like, whoa, this is gonna take a lot of effort.
Right.
On Denali though, because you're on snow the entire time, you can drag a sled behind you for the lower mountain where it's not as steep. So you put about 50%, just call it 50 pounds in the backpack, and then you rig up like a plastic kiddie sled. They're kind of laughable almost, but they're really effective to drag behind you. And then you just put a duffel bag in there, put the other 50 pounds in the sled, and you lash it all together so nothing falls out.
Unbelievable. To carry 3 weeks of food, what type of food do you bring up there in order to like, what are you eating?
It's not super healthy food, a lot of it. It's like a lot of butter, a lot of processed meats, a lot of candy bars, junk food like that, because it's really high density calories.
Right.
It's sort of like a lot of like race type of fuel, goo and recovery drinks and energy drinks and stuff like that. That's like, it's kind of really nice because it's easy to get down, but at the end you're sort of like, I'm ready for some fresh vegetables.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. And the other factor is the altitude. I mean, there's only really, I mean, in the United States, there's only one peak that's as high as that is. So it's hard to train for that. And from a nutrition standpoint as well, it's like running a 100-mile race where like nutrition is so important. You don't want to eat, but you have to keep eating because otherwise it's going to go really poorly really quickly. And so it's like, what is your body going to be able to tolerate? So like, having been up there before, I know that like salty type of foods work really well up high, like above 17,000 feet. Some of the other stuff is just not palatable. It's really hard on the body.
Yeah. The part that I think is also amazing is it's you and your climbing partner for 3 weeks in a remote place, probably in close proximity, sharing tents, walking together. How does that relationship, like, how do you make sure you get along with the other person?
That's a really good question. And I think it's a factor that's often overlooked in planning an expedition. I mean, luckily, I shouldn't say luckily, because it was by design. Like Kishan and I spent really a lot of time together climbing and in general. So I had a really, although we've never spent 3 weeks solid together, but I had a really good feeling about how it would be spending 3 weeks together with him. And we got along really well. It was great. That really makes the expedition a success. The other thing about Denali on the West Buttress on the regular route is that people tend to camp. People are on about the same cadence and tend to camp in the same spots at about 3,000 foot increments. So you camp at like 7,500 feet, and then 11,000 feet, and then 14,000 feet, and then 17,000 feet. And so you have a bit of a social experience, meeting other climbers, some from around the world, that have, everyone has a shared interest, and everyone's like generally pretty psyched to be up there. So it's a fun communal environment. But man, we had some good times just in the tent telling stories. They're telling stories and I hadn't thought about in years. And just it's fun sharing that and hearing and getting to know your partner really well. It's a special experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, what a cool experience. My favorite question to ask, and my last question is, what you did remarkable, not easy to do, not only in terms of finding 3 weeks to go do it, but also all the training and the planning ahead of time. But this isn't your only gig, right? You're not just a full-time mountain climber. You're also a dad, you're a husband, you have a career. How did you make it all work? How did you find time to train, to carry the packs, to do the running, to sit down with the Excel spreadsheets? And how did you find the time to be able to make all this happen?
It's a good question. I mean, really, first and foremost was having the support of my wife was so critical to the success of our expedition. I mean, the training and of course the being gone, but both, I mean, from a logistical, a practical standpoint, and just that emotional support, having her in my corner. I mean, there's just nothing else like that, and that was key. I mean, there's no way it would have happened without that. And it's really, I actually made a list of everybody that contributed in some way to our expedition, and it was not small. I think I made it to like something like 18 people or something like that, of folks that believed in us to take this trip, to make the effort. And that was really cool to have the backing of our community, to take this time out to pursue a really personal goal that's, you know, it means something, but it's like, it's not, you know, it's, I don't know what the word is. It's only for ourselves, only because we want to, and that makes it meaningful. But to be able to pull that together is really cool. I mean, and the other thing that helped make it possible was sort of just like focus. I don't know. It's like, how do you train for a race? It's like when you're gearing up for a race, I imagine like you're declining social invitations sometimes, or you're like, am I gonna drink this beer tonight because tomorrow I'm gonna get up at 5:30 or 6 or whatever time to go running, to go put my miles in. And that was the same for me for like 6 months. I was like, this is my focus, I need to do this. And it really paid off in the end. It's like making all those decisions was worth it. It was worth it. And to go up there and to feel the way that I felt up there. I mean, the last time I was there, Mount Denali, was 13 years ago. So I was like 25.
Wow.
And my aerobic, just like my metabolism, was like good to go. I was like, we didn't do any training. We're like, we're good to go. And now I was like, dude, I'm like kind of worried. Like, am I gonna be all old, or like, you know, having like, is it gonna be hard to drag 100 pounds as like, not that I'm old, but like at this age? And it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't easy, but like it felt doable because of all the training.
Yeah.
So it was worth it.
What's next? What's next in terms of climbing?
That's a good question. I don't have anything that's next right now. I would like to go back to Denali. I mean, because I like it. I think it's a really cool place that's worth going back to again and again. Specifically, I'd like to go back and attempt the Cassine Ridge again. It remains on my mind. I don't know when that'll be. if it'll be next year or in the future. But right now we're just enjoying the summer and being at home and being with the family.
I love it. Well, John, it was great catching up. Thanks for sharing the story. That's quite an accomplishment. Good for you.
Thanks, George. Great talking with you.